Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. So today we're going to start seriously considering the sword. So we're going to be starting with some basic cuts in German longsword tradition. So we're going to see what angles of attacks we can make, how we can differentiate them, and again some tips on where they could be useful, where not, and how to pay attention when doing them. Anyways, so without further ado, so we're going to be starting from the basic positions of Wurmtag. So if you have watched the guards video, you should be familiar with them. If not, I recommend it even just for a little bit to get more context. But if not, basically Wurmtag is a position in which we hold a sword approximately at the height of the shoulder with the edge facing the opponent. So now, what are the basic strikes that we have? So the basic strikes we have in German tradition are the Oberhaus, which means Oberhau, overcut. Then we have Mittelhaus, which means middle cut, and we have Unterhaus, which are undercuts. So we will start from the Oberhaus and we will work our way down, okay? So, for the beginning, so you can either take a stance with your non-dominant foot forward, so NDF, or you can start with your dominant foot forward, DFF. So for now, it changes very little as we talk only about the cuts, but if you watch the footwork video, you will see how some of these differences in stance can change your approaches and your strategy in a combat situation. So here we go. Now, first one is going to be Oberhau, so again, overcut. So, and the way we do the Oberhau, we have the right one, the left one, and we send out our hands straight forward and tip towards the opponent, okay? So, a key thing here is to send your hands always out first before you start moving your body. So, what I mean by that is from the side, it will look something like this. So, slowly extend the hands and bring the blade forward into full extension before you maybe continue with a charge or another cut or something like that. Where beginners often make a mistake is they will do something like this, hop, okay? So this brings your body into range a lot faster and you're also not covered. So the thing about Oberhaus or any type of cut is generally we want to have our cuts be able to defend us as well, meaning that we will try to maybe push out the opponent's blade as we make a cut, okay? So that the opponent's blade can end up on this side and therefore the central line is free and I will be safe, okay? Now of course we can alter this further by, for example, adding a side step to it, you know, to increase our safety, but that's another thing. For now, we're just gonna look at the cut. So again, one more time from the side. So you want to be comfortable in your stance, extending hands forward and then making a cut. Now, the way I like to think about it is that basically it's a little bit like sending out a punch with your right hand while at the same time tasking the left hand with bringing the pommel towards you, okay? And another thing that I like to add on top of that is that how the tip moves, because a lot of times with just this advice, people end up doing this and then making a cut, okay? Which is wrong. You want your cut to reach its full range as you reach your maximum extension with your hands. So you kind of want these two moments to overlap. So you don't want to be like extension, you know, then the blade, but you want to be like blade and extension at the same time, okay? So the way I like to think about it is I almost like to imagine it a little bit like a fishing rod. So you know if you have ever gone fishing or if you have seen anything go fishing, you go like, and the moment they extend their hands, they are actually also extending the fishing rod and sending out the bait. So it's kind of a little bit like that. So you want to imagine the tip as if it was a fishing rod and you want to send it out fast along with your hands. So it's like 1, 2, hop, okay? Now, you won't be doing it from the shoulder, you're going to be doing it, from the back of your shoulder, you're going to be doing it from the front of your shoulder, so you're going to be like, hop, okay? Now, there are a variety of Oberhaus, meaning that they can be like very sharp cuts, so they can be very angled, like almost like into a very, very narrow X, or they can be wider, okay? So anything between this and this angle is an Oberhau. if we look at it as in terms of looking at the clock, so any strike that falls between, let's say, 1 and let's say 2 something, that's going to be basically your Oberhau. And each one of them has its own uses. So Oberhaus that are more narrow are going to really help you with pushing through quickly, while Oberhaus that are wider are going to help you more with swatting away, let's put it like that. Because if I make a narrow cuts are able to kind of bypass defenses, because let's say somebody makes a parry here and we make a very narrow cut here. We are most likely going to sweep their tip and then go towards their head with it. Okay, so technically by going very narrow, we are putting our blade in a position where we will manipulate the parry or the opponent's blade at its weak and then, you know, just continue through. Or we would be aiming for the shoulder or the hands, depending on how wide or how good the parry of our opponent is. While if we go for wider ones, like I said, these are much better if they are sent into countercuts. So for example, an opponent attempts a very narrow Oberhau, or they attempt a Scheitelhau, which is a vertical cut down. So basically, these are going to help you much more with swatting away or attacking into the attack of your opponent, and also along with a sidestep, they're going to prove very, very safe. Okay, so this is how you can use them. Now, going onwards to the left side, so the idea of how they are used is exactly the same. You can go narrow, you can go wide, that's up to you in the situation. But for going from your non-dominant side, so in this case my left, you have two options. You can either place the blade onto your left shoulder, so your left Wurmtag, and then make cuts from there, which I don't really recommend, because if anybody notices you are right-handed and that you have switched to your left side, where there's only a few things that can come from here, and they're going to be better prepared to strategize against you. So what I actually suggest is that from your right shoulder, so from your dominant Wurmtag, so what you're going to do is you're going to start extending the cut, but then you're going to use your left hand to angle it and then send it forward. Okay? So what actually happens is that with your left hand, you move the blade to its left as you're pushing it forward as well. So again, you push forward and then you angle, but you continue pushing at the same time, and then you continue with the cut as you would normally. Okay? So one more time. So this would be like pop, something like this. So you go pop. Okay, so of course from this side you will end up in better positions, like let's say this is wide or the narrow one. Okay, but this one is going to add a little bit of that deceptive moment, because you could also start from your right and then switch into your left one as, you know, a feint into a true attack. Okay, so these are kind of the options here. Now for the next ones we're going to go to Mittelhaus. So Mittelhaus are very simple cuts, middle cuts like we said, and basically what it means is that from your position of Wurmtag, you're going to drop the blade onto your forearm, okay, for the beginning, and then the motion is pull and push to make a cut. So one more time, so from the position of Wurmtag, you basically just allow your blade to fall to your side, so like this, and then from here you pull with your left hand and you push with your right into like a complete cleave through. From the front, again, one more time. So you let the blade fall, you pull the blade, you push the blade, and you cut. Okay? Now, this is ideally how Mittelhaus will be done in practice, but in reality it is not often so. So most likely your Mittelhaus are going to look like this. So you're basically going to be going from the hands, kind of dropping a little bit, while the blade is in front of you, and then making a cut like this, or from the left side like this. Okay? Yes, also for the left Mittelhau, how are you going to do it? So the idea is exactly the same, except you're going to be dropping onto your left hand, and you're going to pull your left hand, and then you're going to cut with the right hand. Okay? So looking from the side, this will be like this. So from your Wurmtag, you drop the blade down, okay? You pull with your left, and then you cut with your right. Okay, it has a little bit of that like side motion, so like this essentially, where you are having like this cleaving again through, and motions of the hands in this like wide arc. Okay, so again, what are Mittelhaus now useful? So Mittelhaus can be useful in a variety of situations, but I find them most useful either as second strikes, or I use them after parries. So what do I mean as a second strike? So let's say we have started with an Oberhau, a very sharp one. So, bam. And maybe we have gotten through most of the parry, but not all of it, or the opponent has raised their hands very, very high, and thus exposed them here. So what I will do is I will go for a cut, and then I will switch from the Oberhau into a Mittelhau, therefore cutting to the hands of my opponent. So the combination will probably look something like puff, puff. Okay? So, very simple, very useful. It allows you to change from a higher target to a middle target very easily. And again, it can be also useful when we are feinting attacks. So let's say again, the opponents are maybe high, or they have their elbows or forearms exposed, and you want to make a cut and then quickly make a change and target the hands. Okay? So this is one thing in which they can be used, and of course this goes for any sequence regardless of actually where the Mittelhau is. So Mittelhau is a cut done through the middle, but technically you can move it up or move it down. So for example, if I was attacking very high, I could technically move my Mittelhau to attack to the opponent's head. So it's not actually relevant to the height of your opponent, it's only relevant in the position of the planes, whether it is like vertical or horizontal. This is how cuts are essentially looked at. So as long as it's horizontal and it goes like through the mid-horizontal plane, it's going to be a Mittelhau. Okay? And after a parry, how would you do it? So for example, somebody's giving you an attack and you make a parry. Most common response to parry riposts are, as you make a parry, to immediately send a cut back. Okay? Or from this side as well, let's say you make a parry and then you make a thrust back. Okay? Now, because this is predictable, most people have kind of like fine-tuned themselves to immediately parry these types of attack. So a very good thing then to do is to, once you parry, to kind of give a small motion as if you're going to go forward, either with a cut on this side or with a thrust on this side, and the moment they pull their blade back into a parry, you essentially exit again to a Mittelhau. So something like, it will look something like this. So the incoming cut, parry, start, the opponent starts pulling their blade out, and as soon as they pull their blade out, you take yours and you do a Mittelhau. It can also be done faster if it's done with like a parry beat and then into a cut. So for example, cut from this side. So as I'm expecting a cut from this side, I will parry and then immediately cut to my opponent's hand. Essentially, I use the parry backwards as a bit of a like a deflection. And then as soon as I have parried a blow and my opponent starts moving, bam, you can enter with a cut again. So again, I would not advise only using this, so I would advise using a combination of these parry riposts, and we will, cover it all in further detail in a future video. But essentially, as long as you keep a repertoire that leaves a little bit of hesitation or unexpectedness to the opponent, you will find greater success in your riposts. Okay? Now, for the last attack that we have, it's Unterhaus. So Unterhau, undercuts, so cuts that come from below. Now, Unterhau should normally be done, so you go from the position of the Wurmtag and you place the blade at your side. Now, the easiest way to imagine it is a little bit like if you were carrying the blade as you would normally in a scarab, so either on this side or on this side, okay? But for our dominant side, what we do is essentially, again, we drop the blade down to our side here, okay? And then how the cut is done? The cut is done by pulling on the left hand and pushing upwards into a cut with the right, okay? So there are a couple of ways that you could do this. So you could either just hold the pommel and then pull the pommel and then enter into a cut. This will end you up in an ox guard. So if you have watched the videos again, you will know this. If not, it doesn't matter. Or you can more grab onto the handle and you can do it like this, okay? So the difference is minimal in a sense of what can be achieved after that. So with a pommel and then with a cut, you're most likely going to end up in a thrusting situation where you're going to be able to push the point further downwards. If you do it with a cut like this, well then most likely you're either looking into another cut or something like that, okay? That doesn't mean that cuts or thrusts cannot be done with either grip, it's just what tends to happen more naturally, you know, due to the position of the hands, okay? So, and from our left side, so the Unterhau is going to be, so you start from your dominant vom Tag, you drop it down, and on this side your hands are going to be crossed, okay? Now this makes things difficult. So as you can already see, it's a very weird position for my hands, and what I actually suggest is opening up your hand and placing the pommel between the thumb and the index finger, like this, okay? So this is going to allow you a bit more of a comfortable grip. From then on, it's exactly the same. So you pull and push up into a cut, and again from the right side, you pull and you push up into a cut, okay? Now, same as Oberhaus, we can make a difference in the angle of the attack. So again, if we're talking about very narrow ones, this is basically starting from either 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock and then going upwards. And of course, if we're talking about wider ones, they're going to go from about 4 and 8. So this can be an Unterhau, but also this, okay? So anything that comes from below, and again, below is relevant to the position of the planes and to your hands and body. So I could, for example, do an Oberhau here, and then instead of chaining with a Mittelhau, I could do an Oberhau here and then chain it with an Unterhau, okay? So again, completely irrelevant, as long as the cut comes from below, it's an undercut, okay? It's an Unterhau. So when an Unterhau is useful? Unterhaus are useful, again, either as countercuts, mostly, to swath away attacks like Oberhaus do, except, you know, in reverse. And they can be used to get into an ox cover very quickly. So what do you mean by that? So let's say that for whatever reason, we are down already. So a big note. So if we are here in the distance with our opponent, we don't really want to do this, okay? So it's a very big motion going down to the Unterhau position, and this is a tempo that our opponent can use to attack us. It's same for Mittelhau, sorry, I missed to say that. So never go for an Unterhau or a Mittelhau when you are in a distance. So what you want to do is, if you want to use them first, you want to pre-prepare them. Mittelhau, I don't think it ever has validity in being used first. Unterhau can be. So what you want to do is you already want to be down when you're entering range. And let's say, so our opponent is maybe also in a vom Tag to his right, and what you can do is you can make an arrow cut up, okay? And then either charge, because you will be covered by the sword, or if your opponent tries to catch you as you're going up, you can use that to make a counter cut to the other side, okay? Now, my more preferred way is to use Unterhaus as, again, secondary cuts, kind of like Mittelhaus as well. So with combinations with Oberhaus or anything like that. So what you can, for example, do is the same thing as with Mittelhaus. You can send an Oberhau forward, and then either when the opponent has parried, you can change the angle by going down and below into the hands, which are usually going to be very, very, very exposed. Now, you can also combo to opposite sides. So, for example, you can go to this side here, and then you can go to an Unterhau on this side as well. So it's not like you always have to chain attacks to the same sides. It also will go with Mittelhaus. You can go Oberhau here, Mittelhau here, okay? It's just that Mittelhau generally tends to work a little bit better while on the same side, because it crosses this whole motion to the side, and it's very visible that it switches sides. So you see, like from here to here, it's more visible than here to here. Like Unterhaus, because they come from below, the person cannot really tell if you are going to go for a Mittelhau or an Unterhau, so it adds like a level of deception. Whereas Mittelhau is going to very visibly stay in the middle, And because of that, it's going to be easier to parry the more time you give your opponent to do it. So that's why Mittelhaus are kind of best kept on the same side, while Unterhaus are usable in a variety. So you can either use them to the same side or to the opposite side. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so basically these are all our basic cuts. Now I'm going to add a small note to the Scheitelhau, which is the vertical cut. So Scheitelhau is regarded as a master cut, and it's just a vertical cut down. The way you would do it is you would place yourself in a high Wurmtag, but don't do this, because this is just an extra travel time that your sword has to go through, and it's not really necessary. So if you're going to go high, be already here with the blade either directly vertically in front of you, up above you, or even the blade already looking a little bit down, and then you're just gonna pull it down already. So this is going to make the cuts faster. It's not going to make them any weaker compared to this. So basically it's all the benefits. Now, why do I mention this as a cut? Well, because when it comes to cuts, there is kind of like a little bit counterintuitive logic in countercutting, meaning that, for example, if somebody sends an Oberhau, a Mittelhau, or an Unterhau, all of these can be countered with a vertical cut, okay? Likewise, also, if anybody sends a vertical cut, the vertical cut can be countered with an Oberhau, a Mittelhau, and an Unterhau. And this is basically done by the logic of what arrives where and in what tempo. So a little bit to cover countercutting also, because I think it's going to be useful to this video, and it is, consistent of just basic cuts. So let's say that we divide our opponent into a couple of squares. So we have the center line. We will have another vertical line to their left shoulder and another vertical line to their right shoulder. And then we're going to have a vertical line at about shoulder height, a vertical line about solar plexus height, and then another vertical, horizontal lines across the waist, okay? So now that you have divided your opponent into like this kind of tic-tac-toe box, this is essential to understanding how your countercutting is going to work. So if anybody sends an Oberhau from this side, okay, you don't want to countercut going to the middle or going to the opposite side of the Oberhau they are doing. You actually want to vertically cut to their shoulder and to the inside of it here. So if anybody starts an Oberhau here, I immediately start a vertical cut going here, okay? So why do we do that? We do that because the Oberhau is a little bit wider, there is still a gap in the tempo of the Oberhau where we can push a vertical cut right down. And by pushing it right here into the shoulder, what we actually do is we prevent the Oberhau from going any further than this. So now you're going to have to use a little bit of your imagination, but now there would be a blade right here at my shoulder and across my hands and extending towards my opponent, which would mean that most likely my hand along with my shoulder would be cut and my cut would have stayed incomplete, okay? So if somebody is doing a Mittelhau, the same logic applies, but this time we don't aim high, because if we aim high with our vertical cut, you see there is a gap below, which Mittelhau is going to exploit, and then we're most likely going to receive a cut somewhere to the waistline, the ribs, and so on. So basically what we do then is we send a vertical cut, but down to about the bottom of the ribs, let's say, or the lower part of the ribs, okay? So the logic is going to be exactly the same. As somebody does a Mittelhau, by landing into the ribs with our vertical cut, we're essentially going to again prevent them from completing the cut by, cutting their hand and also cutting into them. And then, because we're also going to be downwards with our crossguard, the crossguard is going to prevent the blade from going any further, okay? Same logic with Unterhaus, except then we're going to be cutting to the waistline, or like even a little bit like the upper thigh. So anybody who's like in an Unterhau and they start doing an Unterhau from here, what you essentially do is you place a vertical cut right down, pointing into the upper thigh, lower waist, so on. And the logic is again going to be the same. You're going to essentially cut across the hand and then push down and lock it out here. Okay? Same goes for the opposite side. If they start left Oberhau, left Mittelhau, left Unterhau, again, you aim for here, here, and here with your vertical cut. Okay? So, but if somebody does a vertical cut, basically all we have to do with our diagonal cuts, so basically the Oberhau, the Mittelhau, or the Unterhau, so is as soon as the vertical comes, you have to cut a little bit across to the opposite side, okay? So this will allow you to displace the vertical cut as it's coming. So let's say that my opponent does an Oberhau from this side as I do a vertical cut. So what's going to happen is I'm going to be doing a vertical cut, and their Oberhau is actually going to displace me out of the way. So again, I will be cutting, and then their Oberhau comes, and essentially it pushes me out of the way to the outside. Okay, this is because vertical cuts are very weak to manipulation from the sides. Okay, so anytime somebody does a vertical cut, you essentially just want to beat into them, but beat into them to the opposite side. So it doesn't matter if it's going to be an Mittelhau, an Oberhau, or an Unterhau. The point is that you don't stay on the side of your cut. So, for example, if you do an Unterhau, don't stay here, or a Mittelhau here, or an Oberhau here, but cross it to your opposite side. So if you do an Oberhau, do it to this side. If it's a Mittelhau, do it to this side. If it's an Unterhau, do it to this side. Okay? Now, of course, vertical cuts can also vary in height a little bit, but still the difference is not as extreme as with diagonal cuts. So even in that situation, you can still most likely use any of the cuts in order to cover a vertical cut. Okay? Just as always, be mindful of the distance and how fast your opponent can execute a vertical cut, because they can come as a surprise, because they come with very little motion, unlike diagonal cuts, Mittelhaus and Unterhaus, which all have a very small or bigger wind up in front of them, making them a little bit easier to notice. Anything else? No, that will be it for today's class. So I hope you learned something interesting, and as always, please take care of yourself and have a nice rest of your day. See you later. Bye.